Israel is entering an increasingly critical phase. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu now faces mounting pressure from within his own country. Hundreds of Israeli reserve soldiers, once regarded as the backbone of the military, have openly rejected orders to return to duty in Gaza. This defiance comes just as the government prepares to mobilize 40,000 reservists for a large-scale ground offensive. Instead of unity, resistance is growing louder. Many reservists argue that a ground invasion would not only endanger Israel's position on the battlefield, but also increase the risk to hostages still held by Hamas. A group of reservists calling themselves Baggy Sandra has issued the strongest rejection, warning that a military escalation could lead to the execution of hostages, including Israeli citizens. This exposes a rare fracture within Israel's armed forces at a time of ongoing conflict. Israel's Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi Zamir, has repeatedly cautioned that additional operations in Gaza would only place more strain on an already overextended army. He argues Netanyahu's decisions are driven more by political survival than by military necessity. Meanwhile, the physical and mental fatigue of reservists is undeniable. Thousands of soldiers report they cannot withstand the endless fighting. Some openly refuse to return to the front lines. This phenomenon raises a critical question. Is Israel's military strength now at risk of collapsing from within? The refusal of reservists to serve in Gaza has shaken Israel's political establishment. Netanyahu now faces pressure not only from the opposition but also from cracks within his military ranks. Local media describe this as one of the most serious blows of Netanyahu's leadership. Reservists, once symbols of unquestioned loyalty, now lead a wave of defiance on moral and humanitarian grounds. Analysts say this signals Netanyahu's weakening authority. Public opinion is deeply divided between supporting war policies and demanding diplomacy. Protests in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem have grown, echoing the same message: stop the ground assault, protect the hostages, and end the war. Tensions have also seeped into Netanyahu's coalition. Several centrist lawmakers have openly criticized him, accusing the prime minister of failing to balance national security with civilian safety. Some even raise the prospect of early elections should the crisis of trust deepen. For Netanyahu, the choices are perilous. Pushing forward with military action could cost him public support. Backing down, however, would shatter his image as a strong leader, leaving an opening for his rivals. This military rebellion is no longer a disciplinary issue. It may mark the beginning of Israel's political realignment. On the ground, Israeli soldiers face mounting strain. Months of operations in Gaza have exhausted troops physically and mentally. Reports from Israeli media reveal that many reservists are at breaking point, facing unpredictable rotations, supply shortages, and constant ambushes by Hamas fighters. The battlefield itself is a nightmare. Gaza's dense urban terrain restricts maneuverability, while Hamas relies heavily on underground tunnels for guerrilla warfare. Each ground operation carries high risks of sudden casualties. The psychological burden is immense. Soldiers know that every strike may endanger hostages, creating guilt and fear that fuel resistance to Netanyahu's orders. Many reservists feel the war has become a cycle of suffering without results. Military monitors confirm alarming rises in fatigue and combat trauma. Hundreds of soldiers are reported to suffer from post-battle stress, while others quietly withdraw from service. For IDF commanders, the dilemma grows: how to sustain military strength when morale is collapsing. In this reality, Netanyahu's plan to expand operations may do more harm than good. Instead of bolstering Israel's position, it risks escalating losses among its own troops. Amid the turmoil, Israel's top military leaders have spoken out. Army Chief Herzi Halevi Zamir warned that a massive ground invasion could have disastrous consequences. The troops, he said, are already stretched beyond capacity, and the risks of failure are rising. Zamir accused Netanyahu of letting politics outweigh military logic. He warned that continued offensives could not only exhaust the IDF but also trigger the execution of hostages, an outcome with devastating humanitarian and political fallout. Other senior commanders have echoed these concerns. They argue Israel is not ready for a broader campaign after months of attrition in Gaza. Logistical strength is faltering, soldier morale is weakening, and public support is eroding. Yet Netanyahu's office insists military escalation is the only way to pressure Hamas. The widening gap between government and military reveals deep cracks in Israel's defense structure. If unresolved, This internal conflict may present vulnerabilities that external enemies could exploit. For Israel, the danger now lies not only in Gaza but within its own chain of command. Alongside military dissent, Netanyahu faces a wave of public protests. Thousands of Israelis have marched in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and other cities demanding an end to the Gaza assault. Banners reading, "Save the hostages," "Stop the war," dominate the streets, highlighting fears that Netanyahu's policy puts Israeli lives at risk. This movement is no longer confined to hostage families. Students, human rights activists, and even military veterans have joined, accusing the government of sacrificing civilians for political gain. Observers note that these demonstrations rival the scale of last year's protests against judicial reforms. Civil discontent grows with each new casualty report from Gaza, as many believe Israel's global image is being severely damaged. For Netanyahu, the dilemma deepens. Assertiveness may satisfy hardliners but risks alienating an already fractured public. If protests swell further, his grip on power could weaken, bringing Israel closer to political upheaval. Beyond its borders, Israel faces rising international isolation. Netanyahu's decision to expand ground operations has been condemned worldwide. Critics argue it worsens civilian suffering while endangering hostages. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres reminded Israel of its obligations under international law to protect civilians. The European Union has called for an immediate ceasefire, warning of potential human rights violations subject to investigation. Even the United States, Israel's closest ally, shows signs of doubt. While the White House maintains support, members of Congress urge restraint and push for negotiations to free hostages. In American cities, mass protests demand an end to military aid for Israel. This diplomatic pressure further complicates Netanyahu's position. Continuing with military escalation risks weakening ties with key allies. Retreating, however, could collapse his image as a strongman leader. Either way, Israel stands at a crossroads in its global standing. The rebellion among reservists and growing public unrest raise serious questions about Israel's long-term military strategy. The IDF, once seen as a pillar of unity, now faces doubts about its sustainability. Experts warn that if defiance spreads, Israel will need sweeping reforms of its reserve system. After months of war, fatigue and trauma are eroding reliability. Without dependable reservists, Israel's ground strength diminishes. This may force Israel to rethink its doctrine. Large-scale offensives may give way to heavier reliance on technology, drones, missile defense, and cyber operations, to reduce the burden on soldiers. But the greatest threat may not be tactical. For decades, the military has been a source of national pride. If public trust in the IDF erodes, the damage to national morale could outlast the war itself. The defiance of reservists, warnings from commanders, public protests, and global criticism together form the largest political storm of Netanyahu's career. A leader once known for toughness now appears cornered, with Israel's own military unity in doubt. Netanyahu stands at a dangerous crossroads. Pushing ahead risks lives, domestic support, and international standing. Retreating would shatter his strongman image, leaving room for political rivals. For Israel, this is about more than Gaza. It is about whether the state can maintain its cohesion, or whether internal fractures will define its future. The answer will shape both Israel's politics and the security map of the Middle East in the years to come.